much for coming tonight. We are really excited to have Sarah Pearson here. She's with the Child Advocacy Center. And after Sarah speaks, we have Officer Yates. And he's with the Frisco Police Department, and he's going to be talking to you. Both of them will be talking to you about safety. Safety, so important. We worry about our children. We work with so many families where students are eloping, they love the water, they are on their iPads accessing things they probably definitely shouldn't be sometimes. So we realize the more families that we work with, the more we hear the stories, and we realize how important it is that as parents we have the information that we need to be proactive and to make sure that we're creating the safest environment for our students here in Frisco ISD. So thank you very, very much for being here, and we can't wait to hear your information. So thank you.
Like she said, my name is Sarah, and I'm with the Children's Advocacy Center of Collin County. Has anyone heard of us? Anyone? One? Okay, awesome. Yes, I'm over there. Thanks. Okay, so for those, why I'm going to be talking about internet safety today, but I want you to be able to understand why it is that we're talking about this. So we kind of are a nonprofit. We are a nonprofit agency that serves as an umbrella over all of the child abuse and neglect investigations for Collin County. So all child crimes cases, including internet crimes against children, are kind of run through our building as we work together with Child Protective Services and law enforcement and the district attorneys and the medical professionals that work these cases. So every year we see about 2,778 investigations of abuse in our county alone, in Collin County specifically. So this is an issue that is happening. This is something that does affect our community, even in the very affluent area of Collin County. Our mission is to provide safety, healing, and justice for those kids that are victimized by abuse or neglect in our community. And we do that through a variety of services. There's like a handout that I gave y'all that kind of explain what we do. But along the way, working these cases and working with a team of law enforcement that worked specifically internet crimes cases, we realized there was maybe some lack of education that existed for parents to try and mitigate some of the crimes that were occurring that kids kind of found themselves in by seeking things out or maybe not having proper protections in place. And so we're going to try and address that today. Feel free to stop me anytime if you have questions. This is pretty informal, but I'm going to try and make it as concise as possible so we can roll on to the next speaker. But again, it's just if you have any questions, shout them out. We'll try and kind of walk away maybe a little more empowered than when we started. So first, we kind of talk about internet and teaching your kid how to use internet, kind of like teaching them to drive. When your kid turns 16, do you just hand over the keys to the car and let them drive away? Is that anyone's plan? No. What do you usually do first?
Driver's ed.
Driver's ed, okay, yeah, so that includes some practicing. Yeah, what about before that? Before you start practicing, do we talk about how the car works? Maybe kind of explain, even when they're not ready to drive yet, but you're driving, you're sitting there and explaining, hey, this is the blinkers, this is how we change the power steering. So you're explaining how it functions. And then you're going to practice with them. And you're staying with them in the car for a while, guiding them through all of it. Then what else do we have to teach them? Do they need to understand the laws? Yeah, so we're not only talking about, okay, how does the car function? How do you practice functioning this car? But also, what are the rules of the road? How do you navigate as you drive what you're doing? And then, after all of that, are they ready to go drive? Or do we maybe add some rules of our own? Maybe they understand the laws and what's required of them when they're out there, but we maybe put on a curfew, or we say you can't drive with this person, this person, this person. We put more rules around it typically, because this is my car that I own, that I am letting you drive. And this is a responsibility that you have to maintain. If you break any of the rules of our house, you lose this privilege. We usually add some stuff. The same goes for the internet. So before we hand them a device, we want to teach them the functionality of it. We want to walk with them through that for the younger ages, obviously. And then we want to make sure they understand what are the rules of the road, what are the rules online What are the laws that are guiding us as we engage with this? But we're also going to have house rules, and we're going to have family rules. And if they are not abiding by those family rules, this is a device that we have given them. It is a privilege, and they can't lose that privilege. And feeling empowered to be able to do that. So a lot of this is like normal parenting. We're just applying it to the digital world. The other thing we need to think about is that we're kind of in this weird day and age where we're handing kids devices, usually like 7, 8, 9-year-olds. We're handing them devices that give them access to the entire world and the entire world access to them. We may hover over them at the playground and get really nervous about the person that maybe is going to talk to them there, but we don't necessarily always think about the people that are accessing them or have the ability to talk to them online. So I'm going to talk about the different safety issues, kind of broader categories that we see online, so you can kind of start thinking through the lens of what the risks are. But I want to kind of just set the groundwork of knowing that it applies no matter what the device is. So it's not just a phone or a tablet or a laptop. It can also be like their PlayStation, really anything that is Wi-Fi enabled. There was a case, I don't know if any of y'all heard about the crockpot case. Did you hear about that? Okay, so some of us. The crockpot case is basically Crockpot designed a new crockpot so that you could, it could be Wi-Fi, it connected through Wi-Fi to your phone, so you could be at work and turn it on or off or change the settings or whatever. Great functionality, it made sense, it was consumer focused, but it wasn't safety focused. And so, like criminals still do now, they can drive through neighborhoods to see if there's any open Wi-Fi signals that they can hop on to then try and access the systems that those signals are on and gather information and data. And so someone was driving through a neighborhood, hopped on the Wi-Fi signal of the crockpot because it's unprotected, obviously. They were able to get from the crockpot to the device that it was connected to and download all of this information. And in this case specifically, they got pictures off of the phone that they then posted and used as leverage against this family before they were caught. So we need to be consumers that are thinking about what am I handing them? What is the power that is attached to this device, whether it's a crock pot or a phone? Phone we think of more naturally, but it also is, it's gaming systems, it's all of the devices. And if it is Wi-Fi enabled, is there safety settings that I can turn on that I can utilize, whether it's embedded in it or through the router, that will make this a safer device for them to use? Or at the very least, are we having conversations preparing them for the device that I'm handing them, like we prepared them for the driving before I am handing it over for them to use? So the main safety categories that we're going to cover briefly are online privacy, inappropriate content, sexual solicitation, and cyberbullying. These are the there's 4 of them. These are the 4 broad stroke categories of what we want y'all to be aware of as their risks. So online privacy. What do we talk about when we talk about online privacy with our kids? What have you covered about their information?
Not to share their personal information.
Personal information being what?
Their address or name.
Okay, address, name,
School, they go to.
school. So those like specific details about them? Yeah, so we're talking about that. Anything else that y'all add to the privacy conversation? We also want to kind of talk about how people may get that information from them. So we talk about, hey, if a pop-up comes up, this goes back to like the functionality of what you're doing. You're on the internet, sometimes we get pop-ups, we sometimes get ads. If it is in any way asking you for information that is that specific information, like your name and your phone number and your address that we don't give out, come get us. If it's something that you're wanting to get or see or you think it might be legitimate, don't be filling this out on their own. Or set an age of like, hey, at this age, I think you know enough about the internet to be able to make that choice. And then we maybe have a limit of like, but not my credit card or something else. But we're going to talk about what they may be facing with that. One of the big things is location, and sometimes they're giving away location without realizing it. So we need to, if we're giving them a device like an iPad or an iPhone that has mobility, or some sort of tablet, it doesn't have to be an Apple product, but some sort of Wi-Fi enabled mobile device. And it has a lot of cool features in place for you to be able to figure out things through location, but sometimes it's giving away location when we don't intend for it to. So I know that unless you disable it, if you're taking pictures on your phone, it's geotagging where those pictures are taken. So we've had this happen in multiple cases where a kid will take like a selfie in their room, they'll send it to the person that they've been chatting with over Kik or some sort of messenger system in whatever game they're playing. And the person then, if they've not turned off or disabled that on their phone, has the exact GPS coordinates of where that picture was taken. So that person that they're talking to that they may think is a 7th grade boy, or this person's the same age as them, is now running that photo through a easy and free software, getting the exact GPS coordinates and possibly showing up at that location, or just using that information to be able to continue the conversation in the direction that they want and have that as leverage. So making sure we're not tagging ourselves in places or locations at an age where we're not responsible enough to know, like, if someone comes up to me in that location and starts using my personal information, it's probably because they just gathered that details from social media and not because they actually know me. So until they have a savvy to be able to distinguish the difference, then we're making sure that anything we give them, any apps that they're using, they can't have that location service turned on if it's not necessary for the functionality of that app. Then the next thing is inappropriate content. So what do I mean when I say inappropriate content online? What do you think?
Pictures.
Teens, you can answer too. What's the inappropriate content we sometimes run into online? There's multiple. Some of the bad stuff online. Broader categories.
Lack of clothing.
Yes, things with lack of clothing. So pornography, that's one of them. What else do we see online? It's inappropriate. Probably you don't want your little kid to see what?
Violence.
Violence, yeah. So violence, extreme violence, pornography, hate speech, risky or illegal behavior. This is the kind of content that they get exposed to when they're on the internet at large. So looking at this in two ways, looking at what they're getting exposed to, especially if I'm not setting them up with proper filtering and monitoring systems, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But also, I need to be talking about what they can contribute to the noise online, and understanding that if they, even in, for the older kids, we talk about even in the apps that are anonymous, so their name's not necessarily on it, they think they can say anything and have full anonymity, like on a WhatsApp or that's not as anonymous, a WhatsApp or a Kik or a Whisper, or any of those things where you don't necessarily have to have your name attached to it. And they can say anything and do anything they want, and they think it doesn't come back to them. But if they are threatening to bring a bomb to school or threatening to shoot someone, and it's on that platform, we can still figure who that is that said it through a lot of different technology that law enforcement does have. And that's still considered a terroristic threat, which is against the law, whether it's in person or online, and they can still get charged with that crime and face the consequences of saying that, even though they thought it was anonymous. So understanding apps that are anonymous are not actually anonymous, because we can figure out who you are most of the time, 98% of the time. So it's something we don't want to contribute to the noise. We also want to make sure that we're putting filtering in place to not expose them to these things. The one thing I will want to emphasize is pornography, and that is a category that we're seeing be very detrimental because of the rates of kids developing a compulsion to watching it, and that usually escalates, not usually, but a lot of times does escalate into behaviors. And so we are seeing more and more juvenile offenders, so those that are under the age of 17 that are the ones that sexually offending on other kids, whether it's their own age or younger, because their introduction to sex and sexuality and their understanding of what is normal is coming from porn instead of their parents. And this is something, if y'all had to guess what the average age of exposure to porn is, what would you say? I'll ask parents first, and then I want teens to guess what the average age of exposure is to. 12, 7. Okay, teens, do y'all have a guess? 8? 12, okay, so y'all are kind of all in the right range. For the juvenile offender or the juvenile sex treatment program that we have, the average age of exposure is 7 years old. For the public at large, it's usually around 12 or 13, depending on the study you're looking at. So we're looking at this 7 to 12 range being their initial exposure. Usually the initial exposure, about 43% of the time, that initial exposure is an accidental one. So they weren't looking for it. It was either someone showed it to them or they accidentally clicked on something. There is definitely a lot of clickbait targeted at kids, like it was like whitehouse.com or something instead of whitehouse.org, and you were on a porn site. Like, they think about those things that make it easy and accessible. So usually that first exposure is accidental, but if we have not prepped them on what they need to be looking for, they're not necessarily going to have the best response. They won't necessarily know what to do, and they may not necessarily tell us. So we want to make sure we're having those conversations, and there's a lot of great resources out there For 3 to 7-year-olds, you can talk about it with this book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. It's based off of this middle one, which I did bring if you want to take a look at it and see how it covers his content. But this is like my favorite thing that's been written pretty much ever, because it does such a good job of explaining pornography to kids on a level that isn't belittling to their intellect in the 8 to 12-year-old, but is still substantial enough for them to actually get what's happening. Because it talks about how there's a thinking part of the brain and the feeling part of your brain. And the feeling part of your brain will see naked images, and your body will probably respond. That's normal, and that's okay. We also have the thinking part of our brain that gets to make choices. And just like we sometimes want cookies before dinner, and that sounds like a really great choice, but we have the thinking part of our brain that tells us, no, if I have a cookie before dinner, it'll spoil my dinner. And kind of explains it a little more thoroughly like that, gives you parent notes to talk about. So they have that, and then the younger version. And then for older kids, there's a cool, it's kind of a social media campaign / website / nonprofit that called Fight the New Drug, that has a lot of curriculum and a lot of ways of talking about it with kids. And it also has a recovery program for teenagers that already feel like they have a compulsion or they have a problem with viewing pornography too much and more than they can really control. And they have a recovery program called Fortify that helps kids kind of maintain or get rid of their addictions. So it's something we want to talk about. It's something it's not a matter of if they get exposed, it's a matter of when. And so we want to prepare them. And then we're also trying to mitigate their exposure with limiting their risks, whether it's through technology, so their access, making sure we have parental controls on everything, that we have filters set up on all of our devices that we're handing them, and that they're age-appropriate filters. You can do it by age, so there's things that should not be getting in until they start, doing book reports or need a little bit more access to the internet with some of the content once they can reasonably handle it. And you can find filtering software that does it level by level, device by device, so you can kind of cater it to the whole family and not just have a catch-all. And you can do it either through the devices specifically or through the router, and there's a lot of different options for that. So we're making sure they're filtering, that there's parental control set up. There's a lot of those that are native to the devices themselves. I know Apple's really good at explaining parental controls. If you go to the iTunes store, it has a parental guide section, and it helps you walk through all the settings that you can set up on the devices and have codes that you have access to certain parts of their phone that they do not have access to without the passcode. And you can set up a lot through that. Android and Google and all those have some things. It's not quite as extensive, but they do definitely have some parental control options available. I think I just got out of that somehow. And then access, even just physical access. So we do want them to be able to learn self-control with their devices over time, but that is something that you're not necessarily going to know how to self-control and self-regulate at 7, 8, 9, 10. That's something that maybe in the teenage years they can work on. But when they're younger, we're making sure we're limiting their time with the devices themselves. A lot of families will have this strategy of like turning the devices in at night. So you charge at mom and dad's room. You're never on it in your room by yourself. You're on it in a central area, even though it is a mobile device. Those sort of rules based on each kid and their maturity level, what you're seeing with the monitoring software as to how they're handling it, and the conversations you're having, the ways that they are handling that responsibility, and you get to make that call, per kid, just like most of our parenting choices that we're making. So we are talking to them about what they're contributing, that they're not talking about any of the inappropriate stuff. That's kind of, some of it will be the rules of the road, the laws they're breaking, like terroristic threats, or we're talking about the potential consequences of posting these things, like, a lot of schools and colleges and universities are using the social media profiles to kind of screen out candidates. A lot of employers do the same thing. The biggest category of people that use social media to screen out candidates is sports recruiters. I think it's like 90-something% of recruiters for colleges will look at their social media profile, and they are ruling out really good athletes because of this. If they don't want to mess with the noise of an athlete that doesn't know how to control themselves online, because that's too much flack for some of these schools to want to put up with. So that's a huge point for kids that want to play college sports. So talking to them about their posting, what the potential consequences are. Sexting is a big category that we talk about, because we talked about pornography. A lot of pornography is obviously mainstream, more violent, readily accessible, but we're also getting a lot of this self-created category of pictures and images that kids are sending to one another. They think it's the majority of kids that are doing it, or that's kind of like the rumor, but 1/5 of teens have sexted. It's kind of less than a lot of people think because we talk about it a lot more than is going on. Most of those that are doing it with a boyfriend or girlfriend. But the only thing about that is we all know as adults that teenage love doesn't necessarily last as long as we think it is when we're a teenager. So we're seeing a lot of, especially, I know Frisco schools have had this, I know Allen schools, I know McKinney schools have had a lot of revenge porn cases where a boyfriend and girlfriend, they'll send the images back and forth while they're dating, they break up, drama. They now have and possess images of one another. They either create Snapchat accounts or on the school called Revenge My Ex or whatever they want to name it, and everyone has access to the account. They're posting all of the images that they have that's now accessible to everyone in the school. There's very little law enforcement can do about it. There's some cases that we can pursue, but there's a lot that is just, once it's out there, the damage primarily has been done. So talking to them about, hey, once you send it, you don't have control of it anymore. If it's not something you want your college admissions officer or your grandma to see, then it's not something that we're going to share. But that is also really hard for a teenager to get. So we're also talking about, okay, what are you trying to achieve with this? When we talk to them about the reasons that they're sending this stuff, a lot of it, they think that that's how you flirt, or they think that that's how you can like show someone that you're interested. So we talk about relationships, and we talk about, okay, what does it look like to flirt? How do I show someone that I'm interested? What are the dynamics of a healthy relationship? What does that entail? How do I know if a girl likes me? How should I ask her out? Do I ask for permission to do certain things? And we talk to them about the nitty-gritty of relationships as well, because that's going to be, we're trying to get them to get the same fix that they're wanting out of doing these behaviors, that maybe have a little bit better or healthier result, less long-lasting than the damage that sexting can do. So brainstorming like those things, the sending or receiving of sexual images is against the law. There is a sexting law on the books. It's not called that, but that's the nickname. And so if you send or receive an image, a naked image, and you're a minor, I do have to clarify that. Had an awkward conversation after we're training once with a parent. If you're a minor and you send or receive, it is against the law. The only kind of like leeway there is if you receive it, you didn't ask for it, you don't want it, you have 24 hours to report that to an authority or to something like the cyber tip line, and to then not have, not be charged or have threat of being charged with that crime. So making sure that we're addressing it if it is happening in our homes. The next big category is sexual solicitation. So this is people that are trying to find our kids online. There was one case in particular that stood out with a boy that was, I want to say he was in middle school, I think it was an 8th grader, and he posed as a girl named Kayla on his social media profiles, and he pretended he was this girl and started talking to the boys in his school on, I don't remember what it was. It was a platform that's not as popular anymore. But he pretended he was this Kayla girl. He started chatting them up, kind of started having sexual conversations, asked them for some images, maybe asked them for some videos, and then he asked them to meet up at the mall in the bathroom. And so these boys, I can't remember the number, it was in the dozens of boys that he addressed, and over, I think 12 or 13 of them actually showed up at the mall. And when they showed up at the mall in the bathroom, they met Anthony, not Kayla, at the mall. And so there was kind of this awkward like, hey, are you here to meet Kayla? And Anthony was playing the same game of like, hey, or yeah, I'm here to meet Kayla too. And then while they were there, the boys would get a text from Kayla that he had scheduled to come to them around that time. And it would say like, hey, if you don't perform oral sex on Anthony, then I'm gonna send all of your images around the school, and had this large amount of leverage on them. And so 7 of the 13 or 14 boys did what Kayla asked in order to avoid this sextortion that he was doing. So that is obviously a little bit more extreme case, but it definitely is happening pretty regularly. So not only do you have leverage once you send that stuff out, but you also need to understand that not everyone that you are talking to is necessarily who they say they are. And that's something that they have to get, whether or not it looks like a pretty girl and she's giving you a lot of attention. A lot of this is mitigated by, again, we're trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to achieve through these behaviors and how can we get it in a healthy way. So for these boys, you're trying to get that affirmation and attention. Could we have you channeling that somewhere else? Could we have you getting that somewhere else? Are we setting you up in an environment that you're getting affirmation and attention, that you're not bored and talking to random people online, that we're getting you in activities, that sort of thing, to keep you in less of this trouble. Most of the sexual solicitation is happening on social networking sites. Most of it is among older teens. We definitely see teens getting on Tinder and any of the dating sites, and we'll get cases from that, which is really frustrating because they're putting themselves out there, but it is the responsibility, thankfully, of the adult to ask the age, and so we can still charge with a crime. Most of them are not bothered by it. They kind of think that this is a part of, this is at least the feedback we're getting, they kind of just think this is the norm, instead of this is something that I should be really highly offended by and responding to a little bit more firmly. I know some, like with our girls specifically, this is an area with sexting and sexual solicitation that we're emphasizing, like when we say no, we don't give excuses, we just say no. If I don't want to participate, I say no, and my no is made up long before the question is asked. And we do that because so many of them will want to be nice and they don't want to hurt their feelings because it may be a boy that's friendly or that they like, but when you give an excuse, they have an opportunity to come back with something else and break that excuse down. And so it shuts down the conversation a lot quicker if you just give a straight no and you stick to your no instead of giving some sort of reason why. So we emphasize women empowerment with having our no, be no, and stay no. And that helps with that. Offenders will often, nowadays they get to do a lot more direct asks just kind of because of the culture that is kind of grooming our kids for them. But a lot of times they will exploit their natural curiosity. So if we're not having conversations about sex and sexuality and maybe some of the more like hot topics that are a little bit more uncomfortable for us as parents to talk about, if we're not discussing them, they do frequently go online, do talk to people in chat rooms, whether it's in the games they're playing, any sort of activity that they're doing. If there is a chat feature, that's when they become more at risk. So if there's a game like Roblox or something that our younger kids love to do, there is ways to disable chat features in a lot of those things. So if it is a popular game and they do want to participate in it, we can make it safer, but anytime there's a chat or a private feature available, that's when they become higher at risk. I know we used to, when parents didn't want their kids on social media, we used to say like Instagram's pretty innocent and safe for the most part, but as soon as private messaging came out, so many cases come on there. Anytime you can go private, anytime there's a chat feature, that's when we've lost any sort of safety on that device unless we've disabled it or we have a kid that has an ability and a maturity to navigate that well. So most of them are just talking about those things that they have questions about and don't necessarily know to talk to their parents. We haven't addressed it. Maybe it's something we've already shut down as being an open topic in our house. We've had plenty of kids in forensic interviews, which is the interview after an offense taking place, that we'll say like, hey, could you have talked to your parents about it at any point? And there's a lot of like, no, never. Like we don't talk about this at house, or they flip out if I get a B, so I can't come to them with this stuff. And so making sure that we are positioning ourselves as experts on topics that are a little bit more uncomfortable maybe, or harder to talk about, so that they know they can come to us when there is an issue that maybe it got out of hand and they're more in the I'm at risk safety-wise, not just I'm curious and afraid of getting in trouble. Sometimes they'll pose as someone needing help or in distress. More and more kids are doing kind of like the live streaming type sex stuff instead of just sending or receiving. I think some of them think that like maybe that's safer because they can't like, if I text an image, I know that they can use that, but if I live stream it, then they can't, even though they're screen recording, and that's not a really viable option. But sometimes they'll use, there was one situation where the guy was literally like strangling a cat if she didn't keep doing things that he asked her to, and so she was like a huge animal lover, which he knew because he had talked to her and kind of built that relationship with her, and so he was now using that as a leverage and a threat to then get sexual things out of her. We also have had cases where they kind of pose as like, oh, my friend, he's just like so insecure, and he really, I think he'd be really a good boyfriend, but he just like doesn't have a lot of confidence. Like, do you think you could talk to him? Do you think you could have a conversation? Do you think you could X, Y, and Z? And they kind of expound it that way of like, you're really sweet and you're really kind and you're really loving. Like, could you help out my friend that's just like a little bit more socially insecure? And it ends up being adults that are just kind of trapping this kid. So they do sometimes, so like that gets the helpful kids and the naive kids, right? Of like, oh, they just needed help and I was trying to help them. So we talk to them about, no, people take advantage of us online and people are not always who they say they are. And we need to be mindful of that at whatever age, we're talking to, wording that for them. A lot of times the sexual content is gradually introduced. So they may kind of talk about like, oh, are you dating anyone? Or like start asking questions about how far they've gone. And a lot of kids, that's just kind of safe topics for them. But then they start asking more and more and then kind of like, well, hey, I learned this through this porn site. Like, have you seen this? Have you seen this video? And they start to slowly introduce that stuff and make that conversation more and more normalized in the context of that relationship. And then they're able to introduce and then ask for a lot more under this guise of like curiosity and learning together. Sometimes they will pose like they're a kid, but a lot of times they're honest about their age, and a lot of times it's the adult status that is attractive, or the adult status that they use to maintain control of like, hey, if you actually told anyone about this conversation, who do you think they're going to believe, me or you? Obviously when there's like evidence, because it's in technology and we can retrieve most of that even if you delete it because of our software, that's a little bit easier to justify. But in the meantime, when they're pressuring the kid, they're not necessarily thinking like, oh, well, I've got data evidence right now, so I'm going to be fine. No, they're able to use that as manipulation. They'll offer gifts. There's a lot of flattery, building that rapport. They try and separate them from other relationships and try and isolate them. So if they hear about, mom has given you a hard time, they just don't understand you. Like, your parents are awful. Like, you should probably just run away. Like, they don't get you at all. I understand you, though. Like, I get us, and I get you, and I'm the only one that understands you like this. And just truly try to do that isolation game with them. And a lot of times they'll move conversation from platform to platform. So they may meet playing some game on PS2, but then they'll switch to like Kik or some other messaging service that has some anonymity for them, and it's easier to converse and send stuff back and forth. So being mindful of those tactics so we can mitigate them by either making sure they're not having access to anything with chat platforms, but also just once they're older and they are in the self-regulating phase of things, then we're talking about, hey, people don't always say what they mean, and we need to be aware of that risk as we're then there's cyberbullying, and basically this is similar where we're talking about how we're treating people, whether it's in person or online. A lot of these dynamics are the same, it just spreads faster online. I think pretty much everyone's familiar with the term cyberbullying, but it's basically just like bullying, but through technology. So it's, posting mean things, creating mean accounts. There's more and more laws being created around this. I know right now harassment laws will apply to online harassment too. If you do things like create a profile in someone else's name or in someone else's likeness, that's actually against the law. If you're doing something with the purpose of defrauding or intimidating or threatening someone online, that's going to be something you can be charged with. So there are some things, but there's also more and more legislation being passed because of some of the really more extreme cases of negative results of cyberbullying that is putting more and more responsibility on the kid that is bullying, but also on the parent for allowing it on different platforms. And so they're kind of trying to push more towards parental responsibility too with some of these cases. So being mindful of what they're contributing, and a lot of this can be taught through how we're talking about our behavior, how we're talking about how we're talking to other people, but also through our monitoring software that we put in place for our kiddos. And so the filtering software is what keeps things out. Monitoring software is what allows us to see what's going on still. And then we're choosing, hey, what kind of like pick your battles. What am I going to address here? Am I going to address this kind of incident with these friends, or I'm going to let them sort it out? Or am I going to bring it out in a separate way so that I can still maintain this ability to monitor them without them necessarily knowing that I'm doing it, but I'm helping them kind of guide them through this into teenage years type stuff. So technology-wise, we've talked about a lot of this filtering and monitoring software. The most common question is, what's the best one? And the answer is, it depends, because it really depends on what devices you're wanting to filter and monitor. It depends on what level you're wanting to do. It depends on what operating system that you're using. So I know PC Magazine has a review they do every year of the best monitoring software. A lot of them now are being designed to be monitoring and filtering together. So it does have a filtering piece, and that keeps the bad stuff out, set it at different levels based on what the kid needs to be seeing. And then the monitoring is what gives you the ability to still see what the rest of it is. And the monitoring can go anywhere, can be anything from I get a weekly email about what they posted on social media and what their friends posted, to I can literally see their screen on my screen at any time, should I choose to turn it on. Or there's some where you can set up, like these are the keywords, they may give you some options, you may add some own. If they're ever saying any of these words specifically, I'm getting an email about it with a summary of the context. And so you're able to choose what level you want, and they do come at different price points. But, so it really just depends on what you need and what the needs of your family are, and how many different options you need. A lot of them, there's definitely some like wraparound ones that have filtering and monitoring at multiple levels and make it pretty easy. There's a lot of parents sitting in the same boat as you, have a lot of the same concerns, and so they are definitely, you are a consumer that they're wanting to please, so there are a lot of great options out there. So Googling it is going to be just as good as me sitting and going one by one. Consulting your cell phone provider, so a lot of your, like Verizon or AT&T, you call them up and say like, hey, are there parental features I can turn on? Pretty much all of them have that. Some of them, it's like a $5.99 a month fee, but they'll turn on filters so that it's not coming through your data on those phones either. Because there are some features that you can just filter and monitor at the Wi-Fi level, so like on your router box, how you're getting the internet, but if they flip to data, then it's not being filtered anymore. But you can turn on some parental controls at the like provider level. So making sure you're doing that. Exploring the built-in security features. If you follow Children's Advocacy Center of Collin County, either on Facebook or YouTube, we do safety videos. There's at least one a month, and last month I did a whole kind of step-by-step on how to turn on one of the iPhone features. I'm holding this up, this isn't an iPhone. One of the iPhone features where you can put the screen on a single app and they won't be able to get out of it. So that's really great for our younger kids that, the night's gotten crazy, I need to finish cooking dinner, the 3-year-old needs to be like occupied, but I don't want them to be like clicking on things on the phone, so I'm gonna put on Sesame Street and I want it to stay there. So I can put it on a screen lock and a time thing, so like after 30 minutes it's gonna turn off and they're not gonna be able to turn it back on, and the whole time that they're on it, they can't click off to something else. So there's features like that. And we just posted a video on how to access that, but you could also Google it. It's pretty easy. So exploring those features, when you get a device, knowing what its capabilities are and knowing what parental controls you can add to it. Looking at individual apps, if you are going to let your kid have a phone, have apps, it's really helpful to have the family on the same account. That way if they're trying to download something, then you're going to see it too. You can download it on your phone and be able to explore like, hey, is this appropriate for my kid? It's actually really easy. If you, commonsensemedia.org is a really great resource, and you can search anything that they're wanting to download and it will give you a review, and they will give a suggestion or of a recommended age. And you'll be able to determine, okay, this is the recommended age and this is why. My kid's actually really strong in this area, so I think they're fine. They can push that age a little. You can make that judgment call, but it gives you the information you need. So commonsensemedia.org is super helpful. They also do have a whole category and kind of platform for special needs apps. So they have ones that help with kids with like communication skills. They have it that helps with like anyone with learning disabilities, so they have some kind of enhancement apps for different things in the broader category of special needs. It goes through a range. So they have a lot of good resources there specifically for parents with kids with special needs that are looking for apps to help with their learning. And then, so having everyone on the same account, and then also some of the features on if you have like a tablet or a phone, that they can't download things without parental permission, and that's suggested so that you have more control over what it is that they're utilizing. And you can be able to check, does it have a chat feature, that sort of stuff. But also you're able to see, there's a lot of people that will try and use apps and embed things in them so that they have access to people or information. So we had, just an example, a flashlight app that when you downloaded it, asked to turn on location services. So a lot of people will probably just like click yes and don't think twice about it, but if you sit there and think critically of like, okay, this is a flashlight app, Like, why would it need my location? It doesn't. There was spyware on there that it was getting data from your phone and needed your location for that. So having the kind of adult mindset of, if it is not absolutely necessary for the functionality of this thing to turn this on, do not turn it on, because most likely it's not a good app. There's probably some sort of malware on there. And if we're searching through like a common sense media, or we're searching through another reputable source, then we're able to rule out those apps as being used at all. So just being kind of more mindful consumers of not everything is created to help me. Some things have kind of a bad side to them as well. All right, we just one kind of final point is was a survey that was done between parents and teenagers, like of the same group, like parents and their kids, and they asked, have you discussed internet safety with your parent to the teens to the parent? And 61% of the teens said, yes, we've discussed it as a family, and 93% of the parents said, yes, we've discussed it as a family. So do we see the problem here? Like they don't think you had that conversation, and you think that you covered it and we're good. And so to be mindful of that, it's not just like the sex talk. It's not a one-time conversation. Technology is not a one-time conversation. It's not just when we hand a device. We're having teachable moments throughout. We're talking about things that we're seeing. We're talking about things that the media is presenting. We're talking about things that we're seeing our friends doing. We're being involved and engaged, because that's the best way to mitigate some of these safety things from happening. All right, I think my time is up. Do y'all have any questions? Fantastic. Here's my contact information. Write it down, or if you have any questions later. And yeah, next speaker.
All right, next up we have Officer Yates. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. This probably won't take very long. I'm coming to discuss safety. When they asked me to speak, they wanted me to speak about home safety and things for those that have special needs family members. And that is such a broad topic that I could research for months and probably end up not knowing any more than I did when I started. So what I'm going to do is talk from a first responder standpoint. If you have a special needs family member, whether it be a child or an adult, there's ways that you can help set it up so that we can win the situation better and easier. And that's what's important for us. As an officer, getting a call about a missing child, and then not knowing the child with special needs, not knowing that maybe the child's afraid of lights and sirens, or maybe the child loves lights and sirens, or an individual that didn't know their address or their home phone number or any contact information. So these are all things that I wanted to talk about. And I actually went and met with some of the fire department personnel to see what would be good for them, what would they like to see. And one of the things I saw in the research I was doing for home safety, specific to kids with autism, is people putting locks up high on the door. Have y'all heard about that? Because sometimes with autism, kids like to wander. And of course, fire department, those firemen, they freak out when they hear that, because they think if you get a fire, you can't get out. But to them, it was nice to know. And the officer, I actually talked to a captain of the fire department, and he told me a story. He went to a call, and one of the boys there had autism, and he was very upset about these firemen and paramedics coming in the house. And luckily his mom, the mom told the fireman, said, go ask him anything about World War II. So the officer asked the kid about a battle he remembered from high school. In the next 30 minutes, he had a conversation with this young man about who the general was, how many soldiers they put on the beach, when they hit the beach, what the beach. And he told me that if he hadn't known that, it would have changed the situation completely. And again, back to me as an officer, when I go to a call, I expect to get the information that I need. When I ask somebody, where do you live, I expect to get that. And if we're dealing with somebody with special needs, whether it be Alzheimer's or dementia, or it be autism, or they're nonverbal, it's important. There needs to be a way that I can find this out, because otherwise we don't know. And believe it or not, sometimes children with special needs will run from the police. Well, as an officer, what do I think when I pull up and somebody runs? First thought is, what are they doing? They may be doing something wrong. So it's good to know this information. So we have a Take Me Home program. Has anybody ever heard of that? It is a great program. We actually stole it from a city in Florida, and it's for anybody of any age. And you can get online. We've got pamphlets out here. You can fill it out online, or we've got some forms you can take to the PD. But basically, it looks like this. And you just fill in the person's information, description, various information. You'll include a picture. We ask for the disability, whether it be Alzheimer's or autistic or deaf or anything like that. Then we have the emergency contact information. So if we run across this person, we'll know who to call. Then there's a couple of, 12 questions asking specifics about that individual. For example, special interest of this person. Have they ever run away before? One of my favorite ones is, please explain in detail any important information that we may need to know that might assist us in not triggering a violent response. Or, in other words, getting a positive response. Like that fire captain that found out that World War II. All you got to do is ask this young man about World War II and you're going. I was talking to another parent yesterday. Baseball was the same thing. Walk up to him and go, who was on the 62 Yankees? And he'll give you all that information and you can talk baseball. Because we all know with autism or with a disability, they're not always going to react like you and I would react when we're talking. So it gives us information. But if you fill this out and include a picture, it goes into our database, just local in Frisco. And what that does is if an officer finds a young man or a young lady or an older person and they're not verbal, he's not getting the information that he needs, we can, or she, because we do have female officers, I'm not trying to say we don't, but we can actually search our database. And it's not a criminal database, it's under a Take Me Home program, but we can check, search by descriptors. And we can pull up an age, and we can pull up all the pictures, and we can look and we can identify who that person is. All this information will pop up. Oh, right, there's the contact information. There we know who to call. Oh, we know he likes McDonald's, so we get another officer to run over and get a Big Mac, while we're waiting. Things like that that really make our situation much better. We don't want to traumatize someone. And we also use this for older people that have dementia. When they get away from home, they can't remember where they live or how to get back. So it's a great program. I encourage you to do. You can fill it out online, or you can grab a deal application out there. You can drop it off at the police department. I encourage everybody, if you think you're going to need it, if it's even a possibility, fill it out. You'll get an email every so often from the police department. Well, they'll ask if anything changed, maybe a new picture. It's so important. It also works in reverse. If your child or parent is missing, you call the police department, you give us that information. We've already got all their information and a photograph. It gets emailed to all the officers immediately, and we go out and we start looking for that person. We don't have to come to your house and get a photograph and scan it into email and email it out to everybody. So it makes the process a lot quicker that way too. The other thing you can do, and I highly recommend this, especially for the fire department, is you can call our dispatch center, and we have what we call alerts that we can put on your residence. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it gives us information. For example, if you guys, anybody here have an alarm or an alarm permit, you put on there if you have dogs, right? Because I don't want to get bit and your alarm goes off. I'm allergic to dog bites. They hurt. But we can put an alert on there specifically for somebody with special needs at the home. Again, any age. And you can give them the age, the name of the person, the disability, and then anything that you think we need to know. Like in the case with the fire captain, World War II. Because that's going to help me as an officer. That's going to create a situation. If you think if you're at home and you have a medical need and you're home with your special needs family member and you have a medical emergency and you're not able to tell me when I get there or the fire department, that person is going to be in a state of distress and we're not going to know. So like the Take Me Home program or the alert on your home will allow us to then be able to find a common ground where maybe we can calm everything down and make the situation more safe. In talking with the fire department, one of the things they recommended is an alert, medical alert bracelet or necklace, something along those lines to let them know if there's an issue. When I asked them about the locks on the tops of the doors, of course their faces got, eyes got this big, but they stressed with me over and over with special needs family members. have a fire plan and practice that fire plan so that when time comes, under stress, you'll be able to do what you need to do. And the individual will know exactly what they need to do. So if you have a child, for example, that likes to wander and you have those high locks, then practice a fire drill, have a way out. One of the best ways, if you have an alarm system, most of them you can deactivate the motion sensor and just have it on the perimeter, the exterior, the doors and windows, and you can set that so that if somebody tries to get out the door, you'd be able to hear it. So there's lots of good things to go with that, but if you're going to deal specifically with the locks, you've got to have a fire drill so that everybody can know exactly what they're doing. One of the things that I was asked to talk about was water safety. With kids with autism, I believe #1 cause of death of kids that wander from home is water, is drowning. This comes back to something else that would help with your child is if you meet your neighbors. Do y'all know your neighbors? Some of you do, some of you don't. In Frisco, right, a lot of us are working families, we're in and out, we're gone, we don't get to meet our neighbors. But I think it's important to meet your neighbors. Maybe let them know, hey, you know, my son, he sometimes gets out. If you see him out, call me, here's my cell number. The other thing it allows you to do is find out if there's a pool. Does your neighbor have a pool? Because that's real important. Hey, I see you got a pool. Do you have a lock on it? So that, you know, my child can't get back there. And also there's some resources, and I apologize, I didn't get a chance to make phone calls to find out, but we have the rec center, and maybe there's some resources there for pool safety, maybe getting them more familiar with water, more comfortable in water. But my big fear for the situation is I don't want anybody to get hurt, and I don't want anybody to die, and I don't want anybody to be traumatized from dealing with the police or the fire. When I was talking to the firemen, they actually brought a piece of paper to me that a local mother had filled out for her autistic son that liked to wander. It had his picture, and it had a little explanation of, hey, he likes to wander, he likes to go to the park. If you see him out, please call me, and had a phone number and everything. They had it stuck up on their bulletin board where they eat meals. So they knew exactly. So that might be a good idea too, is drop by the local fire station. We have them everywhere in Frisco. And they're usually there. So the other thing about wandering is there's GPS devices, Bluetooth devices that you can wear as a wristband, or various things that maybe you could use also. It's scary as a police officer to get that call. You know, hey, my special needs child is gone, and here we're running around, and the first thing we do is tend to go towards water because we feel like by default that may be where that child ends up, but it's a scary, scary feeling, and we don't want anything bad to happen. Do y'all have any questions on any of that? I know I talk fast, and it's not near as interesting as what y'all learned. I'm a school resource officer, so I work for the Frisco PD, but I work in the schools, and everything she was saying is true. I see it in the schools with the phones and the social media and all that. So that was actually really interesting. I learned a couple things watching it. All right. I know they told me I had 30 minutes to speak, but I don't know that I've ever talked for 30 minutes in my life. I talk too fast. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you.